Have you ever heard of scope creep? It's a term used in game development to describe the phenomena of developers, especially new developers, getting so carried away adding and developing new features for a game that they lose the plot entirely, create a hopelessly convoluted and overstuffed game loop, and no longer have the skills to execute on the behemoth of a project they've created. I think we should be porting this term over to authorship. We've all heard the advice to write small stories first, and it's good advice. But what do you do when your 50-page novellas keep turning into 4-novel epic dramas with a handmade language and a cast size that would make an anime blush? World building is good. Everybody loves a deeply built world and an environment that feels rich with real characters, developed cultures, and political stakes that extend beyond the abilities of the main character. Of course, you should be taking the time to flesh out your world and character backstories. But do you need a handmade language? Do you need to know the exports of this coastal city that your characters stop in for 2 pages for a food refill? Does that coastal city need to exist at all? World building is fundamentally built on questions. What if this? What about that? Where did this come from? When did that happen? Why is any of it here? Without questions, you can't world build. But some of us, me, might be a little too good at coming up with questions and not skilled enough yet at figuring out which questions deserve answers and how to answer them. For those coming from my last video, writing a lot is still good. Better writers than I have posited that world building is an iceberg. It can go as deep as you want, but people will only ever see the 20% above the surface. This isn't about refusing to do world building, it's about figuring out what world building is going to make it to the final cut, and how to recognize when you're off on a tangent. So if you're also the type of writer who gets caught up in detailed magic system tangents but has no idea if your starting town has a mayor, let me give you some tools for recognizing when to stop and how to keep things simple. Question 1. Are you on topic? Imagine that each element of the story is a building block, and your scope is a circle drawn around them. You can keep stacking blocks on top of each other all you want and stay within the bounds, but if you start trying to make new stacks to the left and right, you're going to need a bigger circle. The circle is your scope. To keep your scope small, you're only allowed to build on ideas you have already established, not add new ones. How do you know if an idea is building or expanding? Ask yourself if it falls under the umbrella of your original idea. Is this a sub-theme or is it a whole new bullet point? Here's an example. You're writing a story about a spectral supermarket. It's a grocery store, but for ghosts, staffed by magic humans who can see them. Here are 2 world-building questions you could ask. What do ghosts eat? Or what magic powers do other humans have? Neither question is unreasonable, but the first question is building on the concept. It's a grocery store for ghosts. Grocery stores sell food, so what do ghosts eat? This question builds on both the setting and the nature of the ghosts, so it's a worthwhile exploration. The second question is asking about people who may or may not even be at the store. It requires coming up with something new, something that may or may not end up being relevant. And crucially, it will develop its own list of questions. If everyone has powers, what does society look like? Are there superheroes? Is there a government oversight committee? Is the government evil? What if our protagonist has to join a group of renegades to use their power to fight that committee? Hey, this is cool and all, but it has nothing to do with a grocery store or ghosts. This is an outline for an entirely different book. So what do you do when you realize you're on a tangent? Well, you have 3 options. You can, 1, cut it. If it's not actually adding anything in the long run, let it go. Save your energy. Maybe you can use it later. For now, refocus on the original vision. 2, decide that this is more interesting than your current story and pivot. Maybe you're realizing that this story is a dead end, but you have lots of ideas for this new tangent that feel rich with possibility. Beware shiny object syndrome, but you're allowed to have new and better ideas. Just be aware that you're going to take the focus away from the original, this is going to be a different book, and make peace with that early. 3, if it's a genuinely good idea but still out of scope, don't explore it, just reference it. Referencing things outside of the story gives the appearance of depth, whether you dive deep into them or not. If you built out a whole evil government subplot but you don't have time for it, have your haunted cashier bond at the bar with an employee from the government who also hates their job. Have the ghosts gripe about politics at the counter. Give us a tiny monologue about how the prices keep going up as the government price gouges its own people. Focus on the effect that it has on the protagonist and leave it at that. Readers will be impressed that there's such deep lore ready to be woven into these little interactions, rather than being confused and annoyed that you're taking a sudden detour from their slice of life novella into a dystopian action-adventure trilogy. We'll go into more depth about how to tie in fringe concepts later. Just know that there's nothing inherently wrong with having and entertaining new ideas, but at a certain scale, you're just not going to have time or space for everything. Try to build short and deep, not wide and shallow. Checkpoint 2. Does this question need to be answered? There are 3 facets to this. 1, is anyone actually asking? 2, does the answer matter at all? And 3, are people asking for the right reasons? For the first, is anyone actually asking, it can be easy to overestimate what our readers need explained versus what they don't. Suspension of disbelief is a powerful tool. For those who need a refresher, this is the idea that an audience coming into a fictional story knows that they may need to accept some things that are fantastical for the story to work. When an audience first engages with your media is your best chance to slip world building in without having to come up with an explanation for it. If your world has demons, then great, it just has demons. As long as you come out with that up top, you don't need to explain where they came from, just like you wouldn't need to explain human evolution theory to write a slice of life modern romance. This facet of the world can be accepted as a baseline, and explaining it is going to drag down your pacing. It is important to know what needs explaining and what doesn't. Demons and technology are generally from separate genres, so if your demon protagonist is wearing the latest AirPods, I will want an explanation. Then again, if you open your story by saying, it's the modern world, but everyone is a demon, never mind. Cell phone explanation no longer necessary. Whatever you present as your premise, as long as it's within reason, is a gimme in terms of suspension of disbelief, because your audience has to accept this part for the story to work. One recent example of this is K-pop Demon Hunters, which has gotten some playful ribbing for what is actually kind of a genius name. They want to market to the mainstream, but their idea is a little wacky for some audiences. They're K-pop idols who fight demons? What? But they front-load this expectation by sticking their premise in the title and demanding that you accept it. And true to form, when we get into the movie, it wastes as little of its runtime as possible, getting you up to speed. We're opening with a musical number. These are the 3 K-pop idols. It's set on modern Earth, and these 3 are next in line for a generational magical musical task force that prevents a demon army from breaking into this dimension and eating everyone's souls. Got it? Got it. Moving on. It does explain some things eventually, and it's clear from the behind-the-scenes material that this movie was an iceberg, because there's a lot of lore that they never got to. But the point is that they reserved their very limited screen time for only the questions that mattered. Freerin is another example of this. Freerin is just using the Tolkien setting. It's also the D&D setting and the Isekai setting and the fantasy generic setting, but regardless of where you want to argue that it's coming from, Freerin, at least up top, just rips it wholesale. Elves are tall and pretty and live very long. Dwarves are short and stoic and wield axes. Only clerics can heal. Monks exist as a fighter class, and they openly discuss their party composition in the show as though they can see each other's stat blocks for balancing. Frieren is not really an anime about its setting. It's an anime about life and death and memory, and it wants to start talking about that as soon as it can. So knowing that you're almost certainly familiar with this base of world building as a genre convention, it just leans on that and keeps it moving. Why would it explain to you what an elf is? You already know what an elf is. Crucially, it breaks this rule in only a few key cases. When it changes something from the base setting, when it's adding its own new system, or when it wants to reaffirm that something is important. Those first 2 things are self-explanatory, but the last is very important. For example, wizards learn spells from books in the base fantasy setting, and Freerin is a wizard, so she can do that. They don't actually have to spell this out for us, but they still do, because it's a crucial part of her character. Her fascination with magic, the reason why she's fascinated with it, and what she does about that is a key part of the plot, so it gets reaffirmed to us as world building, both to confirm to the audience that it works the way that we expect, but also so that if you aren't familiar with this rule, you can't miss it and ruin the impact of the story for yourself. They have identified a crucial question that is load-bearing for the plot, and therefore dignified it with an answer. It's also notable that almost every vampire story of the modern day does this as well. No running water, no crosses, no garlic, no sunlight, yes coffins, yes blood, yes immortality, maybe veganism. If you're writing a vampire story, good news. These are all presets. They come with the genre. You only have to clarify it if you're changing something or if something is particularly important to this book. Castlevania on Netflix does this, and I encourage you to think about what it answers and why, but the script is already too damn long, so I am moving on. For a great example of the opposite of Freerin, using the setting as an establishment for more questions, Dungeon Meshi also wholesale lifts the same generic fantasy setting, but then it goes out of its way to explain how everything is different. This is exactly the type of question identification that we are trying to achieve. Why does Dungeon Meshi re-explain itself so much as opposed to how Freerin doesn't explain itself at all? It's not because Dungeon Meshi is a badly written show, or because it thinks that you don't know what a dragon is. It's because it used the generic fantasy setting as a baseline for its own unique world building, and the show revolves around the world building. These questions that are usually assumable. What is a dragon? What happens when someone dies? Why is there an antidote to this specific monster's venom lying around this dungeon? Is exactly the thing this show was built to address. The show is about these questions and the complicated but satisfying answers that the showrunner came up with. They explain absolutely everything about the biology, from fantasy genealogy to monster ecosystems and dungeon loot, but they don't explain some things that you might have expected them to. What spell is the wizard using? Ever? What's the deal with this guy's kingdom? Some of these are mysteries that might be explained later, but some of them are just straight up hand-waved because this show knows what questions it wants to answer, and these are not it, so it doesn't waste time. Last quick example. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a masterclass in this. Welcome to the show. Here's the shortest possible monologue explaining the magic and political system. Goodbye. Welcome to the plot. They don't explain why people can waterbend in the literal sense. They explain how to waterbend. They explain when people can waterbend. They explore what it means for people to waterbend. These questions affect the characters, the societies, the plot. What happened to this world to make elements manipulable is not interesting or necessary here. You know what is interesting? When they actually address the edge cases. Humans are 70% water. Can I bend them? It turns out yes. This moment is thrilling because it is answering the right kind of question. This is the kind of question that everyone is interested in, a logical progression of the magic system and an edge case that could have severe ramifications on the plot, but you don't actually expect the show to answer it. So when it does answer it, and the answer is sick as hell, it is so rewarding. It's impressive. It feels like they are paying attention to their own lore. They pull the same trick with metal bending later, and it works again, because they are choosing to answer questions that result in satisfying moments. These are the kind of results you can achieve when you answer only the questions that matter. If you're still asking yourself after all of that blabbing why you can't answer premise-related questions, I mean, you can. You have free will, but you're risking two potential issues. 1. If everyone already accepted the mystery of something as part of the plot, but your actual answer makes no sense, the audience may start to mistrust that you know what you're doing. For an example, see Stranger Things and what happened to the Upside Down. Nobody needed or wanted that explained, and the dumb explanation ruined it. This is also an example of answering so many questions that you eliminate all mystery in a series that needs mystery. Number 2, you might try so hard to justify your basic setup that you are massively distracting from the point of the book. Pacing, people, pacing. I don't need to know why every tree in this forest is here. I want to hear about the epic fantasy adventure that I signed up for. That follows into the next point. If this question is not important, why are you wasting my time answering it? Does the answer to this question change anything? If not, chuck it. Let's talk about that haunted grocery store example. What big brand supplier do they use? This is a question someone could ask. You could spend some time doing world building for this to come up with an answer. Maybe everyone at Kroger is haunted, or Cisco is ghost racist and doesn't cater here. You're allowed to answer whatever questions you want, but what does this change? Does it matter to anybody? Does it matter to the cashier? Does it matter to the ghosts? Does it change the quality of the food to a degree that somebody would notice? If not, just toss it. It's not important, and the more time you spend explaining it to me, the more I'm going to be annoyed with how long we've been off topic. Again, learn to just reference this kind of thing. Make it a running gag or something. If you must describe the forest, describe the forest. But if you make me sit through the backstory of every tree, they better goddamn be important. Respect your audience's time and patience. The third facet is a tricky but important one. Are people asking for the right reasons? This is a check that you should be doing often. Sometimes you're trying so desperately to answer a question that fundamentally sucks. It ties everything up in knots, but you've convinced yourself that it's necessary to answer. But is it? First of all, if anyone did ask this question, are they asking because they're interested or are they asking because they're confused? Just because someone asked a question doesn't mean you should answer it. Maybe you should revisit the source of the question. If your political system is so convoluted that people keep asking, wait, who is he? What's his role again? How is that different than the other guy? How does that work? Maybe the answer isn't that your readers are stupid and you need to write 5 more pages of explanation dump to make sure they get it. It's more likely that you have a fundamental flaw in your political system and you need to overhaul or ditch it. In the same vein, don't dig yourself into a hole. If something wasn't working to begin with, you're probably not going to fix it by adding a whole bunch of stuff on top. The base is unstable. If your magic system has this many exceptions that you need to address for it to work, it might not be complex, it might be convoluted. Those are not the same thing, even if they feel similar in the moment. Additionally, questions lead to other questions. What magic powers do other humans have is sometimes only a few questions away from, I need to know the detailed political history of the anti-superhero government for this book to work. If you're finding that none of your answers to a question are satisfying, or they don't make any sense, or they are all feeling like tangents, ask yourself if this question is a good question. But what do you do if you realize that it's not? I'm stuck on a question. What do I do? You've realized a question is a tangent. That's step one. But now what? What kind of bad question is it? If you've determined that it's not worth answering in the first place, you have my permission to just give up. Don't waste energy on something that's not worth your time. If it's worth answering, but you can only think of convoluted answers, ask yourself what the simplest, shortest, sweetest answer you can give is, and make it that. Why can the humans at the haunted grocery store see ghosts if they don't have powers? Because they get a ghost-seeing amulet as part of the uniform. Are there follow-up questions to this? Sure, but you don't have to answer them. Don't recoil from hand-waving things if it's not important. Unless the nature of the story is that seeing the ghosts is emotionally impactful, just put the issue to bed. If you can't even fathom giving this question an answer, but you're certain that it had some merit at some point, you've already come too far. Backtrack. Figure out what inspired you to ask this question in the first place. Why are you designing political hierarchies? Because the government is evil. Why did you make the government evil? For there to be a supervillain for the superheroes. Why are there superheroes in a grocery store story? Because the people at the grocery store see ghosts, so surely everyone else has powers too. There's your fallacy. You've convinced yourself of something that isn't true. The question that you're actually trying to answer is, why can the people at the grocery store see ghosts? And now you have to evaluate this question and come up with a different answer. But okay, what if it actually is an important question and you figured out what question you're supposed to be answering, but all of your answers are still going on tangents? Let's talk about how to give meaningful answers. What does it mean for an answer to be meaningful anyway? Frankly, this can be a subjective question. It's art, it's your project, whatever resonates with you at the end of the day. That said, for the sake of your readers and your sanity while writing, here's some advice. Stay focused. Like we talked about, your answer should reinforce an aspect of the plot. If you have the choice between expanding your main character's backstory or creating a new character with a new backstory, choose your main character every time. You don't need new side characters. On that note, try to build outward from the original idea in the first place. Don't go looking for new things to world build just for the clout. Ignore that advice about being aware of the mineral trade in every small village that you put on your map. You don't have a single character in your book who cares about the mineral trade. If you care about it, get yourself a blacksmith character. If you don't care about it, don't go adding things for the sake of completion. You have a noble character, so go develop the political hierarchy. You have a fisherman, so develop the coastal towns. Do not start writing backstory for the mines unless you are okay with not using all of it. Make it matter. If you insist on answering what food distributor the grocery store is using, make it have an impact on the characters. If they get their food from normal Kroger, why does it matter? Who cares? But if they get their food from ghost racist Cisco and are facing shutting down because Cisco is knowingly raising prices on them to cut their margins, that's tension for the story. That actually matters. Note that this does not mean you should always raise the stakes. Maybe it matters because they get all their food locally grown, but that means they operate on razor-thin margins and feel responsible for the community. Or maybe the food is all locally grown, and that attracts the most absolutely insufferable customers who are constantly harassing our minimum wage cashier about the minutiae of the distribution process. It just has to have a real, tangible effect on something going forward. Force things to come back around into the original vision. You created a character and you're really attached to him and he has no business being in the story. Fine. Take one of your existing gaps in the story and put him in there. If you were missing an evil villain, he's the villain now. If you needed someone to have wounded your character as a child, he did that. If you needed a mentor, he's the mentor. If you have a missing character in one part of your plot map and a useless character on the other side, merge the two. On the same note, tie things together. Answer as many questions as possible with one solution. This will make the plot point impactful and will save you some headache tying the A plot and B plot together. This character needs a mentor. This character needs a love interest. This character hurt somebody very badly, but you never decided who that was. Make all of those missing characters the same character. This will instantly give that character a complex, intertwined place in the story, conflicting character motivations, dynamic relationships, and a reason for existing. Plus, you will only have to manage one character instead of 3. Just be careful about doing this with your main character. If they're underdeveloped, this is a great way to fix that. But if they're already a Mary Sue, do not add more things. They should be the main character for a reason. They should have interactions with everyone. But they should not be the king and the princess and the mayor and the assassin and the wizard. And last thing, when do you answer a question? When it becomes relevant. If you're in chapter 1 and you're explaining the spice trade to the reader, but they're not going to talk about it again for 20 chapters, this is currently useless padding. Even if the question itself is very important, your audience should be asking about it before you provide an answer. That will mean that the audience actually cares. Now, I know, I hear you screaming at me. Foreshadowing is an exception. But in this case, ask yourself if this deserves to be foreshadowed. Will there be a twist or a subversion? Do you need the audience to have an established understanding of this system so that something works later? Does something need dramatic buildup? Is this an underlying theme for the whole book that should come up subtly throughout? If your answer is no to all of those questions, are you sure you are foreshadowing, or are you introducing the spice trade 20 chapters too early? Also, there's a difference between foreshadowing something by hinting at its existence early on and info-dumping about your fantasy economy before we get to meet the protagonist. If no one has asked the question yet, and you have failed the foreshadowing test, you should not be answering the question yet. What is foreshadowing, really, if not planting the answer to a question before the question is asked? Have I lost you yet? I hope this thought experiment has been helpful. I should clarify that, for as much as I am trying to follow this advice myself, this is definitely an instance of the blind leading the blind. Group therapy, if you will. I'm in the process of trying to apply this to my own story as well, so if you have different and or better advice, I am begging you to leave it in the comments. Help me! If you're struggling with the same issues, feel free to ask for your help down there as well. Just remember to be kind to others. Writing is messy, and we're all figuring it out together. I'll be back soon. I'm working on getting into the flow of scripting and editing, but trust me, I am not out of ideas. Until next time, peace!